George, did you get one of these? One for her. And George will come with the beers. So are there two different, are we ready?
Yeah, just begin. It's not working. Dave is recording, so that's good.
Thank you very much for coming this evening. I gave you each one of these because we're going to start with a poem and we're going to end with a poem. And this poem, if you've had the few minutes to look at the other side of it, you'll see it's written by a Dutch Carmelite who was martyred at Dachau in 1942. So I will read the poem if you follow with your eyes. Before a picture of Jesus in my cell, Blessed Titus Bransman, 12th and 13th of February, 1942. A new awareness of thy love encompasses my heart, sweet Jesus. I in thee and thou in me shall never part. No grief shall fall my way, but I shall see thy grief-filled eyes. The lonely way that thou once walked has made me sorrow wise. All trouble is a white-lit joy that lights my darkest day. Thy love has turned to brightest light this night-light way. If I have thee alone, the hours will bless with still cold hands of love my utter loneliness. Stay with me, Jesus, only stay. I shall not fear if I, reaching out my hand, I feel thee near. Written in isolation in a prison cell, 7 weeks after he had been arrested by the Gestapo, on his way to Dachau, where he would be experimented upon and murdered by lethal injection. This Dutch Carmelite, I happened to be at his beatification in 1985 in Rome with John Paul II. It was one of those rare events where you turn around and the Pope's right there. He puts his hand out, so what are you going to do? He grabs his hand. I have pictures of it. One of those touching moments in your life. And that was 1985. After my partial recovery from hepatitis in 1983. And tonight my talk is Encountering Jesus even in times of isolation. How to pray, listen, and journal. Well, I mention this poem because in his isolation, he grew closer to the Lord. Matter of fact, he comments in his letters that he was able to send out that he never felt so free as when he was jailed. Because now he had time not to be distracted by anything else, but to give his heart over to the Lord. And he even took in his breviary, that's the liturgy of the hours, in between the lines he was writing a biography of St. Teresa of Avila, just from his memory. Didn't quite complete it because the Nazis made sure of that. But Titus Brandsma has been an inspiration to me since I've learned his story. And realizing that this poem was written 5 years to the month before I was born. Well, before that beatification in 1985, I had been with the Carmelites a number of years, and I volunteered for Peru. And I went down to Peru, and I went to the mountains, and during the rainy season, I went to the coast to get more language skills. They never were good before, they've never been good. When I was on the coast, I got ill. On the 4th of February, 1983, I was in language school, and there was only 2 students, the other guy and me and 1 teacher. And she would go back and forth. He would get something to say, then she'd turn to me. So while she was in the process of saying something to him, she looked over at me and I grimaced. She could see that something was wrong. So she stopped the class. She said, "Why don't we go out and have a little beverage?" So we went out and had a little beverage. We finished the class. I went back to the house. I didn't feel well. Matter of fact, any of you who've ever had to your house, you know I have an appetite. At that time, I was 160 pounds. You know I'm not that now. But I lost my appetite that day. I really didn't want to eat anything. And so I went upstairs to my room there in Lima, in our Carmelite friary, and I noticed I just didn't feel right. And so I looked into the mirror, and my eyes were yellow, and my skin began to turn yellow, and I had to urinate, and it was Coca-Cola, and my feces was white, like ash. That's not how it's supposed to look. So I sought some help out in the house, and we went to see the doctor, and the doctor wasn't quite sure what kind of hepatitis I had. So he said, let's examine it for a few days. So after a few days, I still wasn't feeling better, so I was admitted to the hospital for a week. And during that week, I had many visitors, and the doctor still wasn't quite sure of the kind of hepatitis I had, but he was going to guess. He thought I had type A, which means a bed rest for a month. If you've ever had bed rest for a month, you know it's not a comfortable bed rest. So I went through the regimen of the month, and I was tested every 2 weeks, and there was no progress. My numbers were not going down, actually they were going up. And so after a month back in the house, it's getting now onto 7 weeks, and the diagnosis hasn't really progressed. So they're not sure whether it's A or B. And I got so bored after 7 weeks that I decided I had to do something. Because they said, don't do anything, just sleep. Just sleep. Try that for 7 weeks. So one day I saw that there were paints in the house, and I painted a picture. End result, 3 weeks back in the hospital. Same hospital, different room. The room without the ants. The other room had the ants in it. Anyway, the Clinica Anglo-Americana was the hospital. And in my second hospitalization, I start weeping because I wasn't improving. I was losing weight. And I was anticipating, even in my first hospitalization, when the doctor examined me, I said, my parents are supposed to come down and see me here in 12 weeks. Will I be up for guests in 12? Oh, yeah. Now it's 11 weeks into this. With the second hospitalization of 3 weeks, all told a month. And I find myself weeping. And that particular situation was the parallel to me from what Titus Brandsma had. Isolation. I couldn't eat with anyone. I had to spend my time alone. The hearing Mass had to be over the radio. It was quite an experience. And out of that experience, it came a new sense of trying to pray. Because I wasn't even supposed to be praying the liturgy the hours because it was a strain on the eyes. And they just wanted you to sleep. So I had to do a lot more mental prayer. Find a different way of praying. Spontaneous prayer. Prayer that was grounded in praise and thanksgiving, where I didn't have to exert myself much. And also a lot of mental prayer with trying to develop a hearing heart, that I could listen to the Lord trying to speak to me. Because most of our experiences, we think we've got to say something to God. But listening is hearing God saying something to us. In our experiences, in the Holy Scriptures, in the sacraments, the Lord wanted to speak to us. And so I found that in this experience, this other type of prayer was developing, and a desire to hear more than speak. Now that's 38 years ago. And the parallel to that this year is our 2020 and 2021 pandemic, where we've been isolated from each other largely. I had 4 trips in the last year that all were canceled. I couldn't go anywhere. You probably couldn't go anywhere. Grandparents haven't seen grandchildren in many cases. It's been that kind of a year of isolation. How have I dealt with it? How have you dealt with it in this past year? Have we developed new forms of prayer? Have we become better listeners? Have we done some kind of recording of what's going on during this time? That leads me to speak about journaling. My first journal was 1961. I was a 7th grader. And I was an altar boy, because that's what they were called in those days. We didn't have altar girls, so we just called the altar boys. So as an altar server, at Christmas in 1960, I was given this day book. It only had 1 line per day, 24 pages, 2 sides of one would be 15 days, or 16 depending on the length of the month. And you had to put in one thing that really stood out to you during that day. It might be celebrating Mass. It might be seeing someone. It might be what you read. But to mark it out. And it's remarkable, a number of things from 1961 have had a profound effect upon me, long-lasting, such as a visit from my great-uncle Ed, who came in the summer of that year. Only met him once, but became writing buddies of each other. And he went on to live until he was 86, died dancing the square dance. And had gotten married for the first and only time at 75. My uncle, your great-uncle Ed. So that was my first experience was 1 line a day. Not asking for too much from a grade school boy. However, that year of 1983, I had this book. You can see it's a lot more than 1 line per day. It's 365 days. And I bought it in Peru, and so it's got a lot of Spanish in it. But I went and reviewed it the other day in preparation for this talk, And I was surprised how it jogged my memory and how it corrected certain things in my memory, such as the kind of isolation I was going through that year, and what it was like to come home to my parents for 6 months and have them wait on me hand and foot, and loving it. They loved it. Our son's home, and we don't have to go to Peru to see him. Well, it was dreadful for me, because you don't want to be an invalid in your own house and have your parents waiting on you at your age. So this is another experience of journaling. And currently, I am employing this book, bought at Barnes & Noble. It's 400 pages in it, which leaves me 35 pages after the year is over to have a summary, 3 pages per month. And I've had this model of book since, I'd say about 2009 or so, buying one at Barnes & Noble. But I want to show you another journal book, which our neighbor Dave has assembled. Follow Me, 30 Days of Walking with Jesus. And in it, there were pages for journaling, for your response to the scriptures, for your response to prayer and to acts of charity, time, talent, and treasure, forgiveness, reconciliation. Journaling is a very important thing I've discovered in my own life, because it allows you to reflect and also to be accountable to yourself. If you review your journal with any kind of periodic ways, like at the end of the year or the end of a month, how honest are you with yourself in what you put down? How much does it express your desire to grow in prayer and in listening? How well does that take us to being encountering with Jesus and not experiencing simply the external isolation of a pandemic? So the prayer that we started with, I'd like to end by another prayer that took place during that time of the pandemic. Or for me, it was a pandemic. Everybody was getting hepatitis. The other priests I was working with, they were all getting hepatitis. We were taking turns getting hepatitis. I actually filled in for another priest for a month when he got hepatitis. And then when I got it, there was nobody to fill in for me, because everybody else had it at the same time, but having different kinds. And in my experience of Holy Week in 1983, in my second hospitalization, I wrote the following. And at the end of our talk, if you'd like to copy this, I'll hand it to each one of you. You've seen it here. It's been in our bulletin. How still the face. My response on Good Friday, similar to Titus's response in his cell in 1942, this is what came to me meditating upon the image of the Holy Shroud. How still the face. It is finished. One thing left to do. The body drained of blood, leaving only residue. Those hands are crossed in their final repose. Shroud cloth is to be his last close. Your friends, the few, have brought you here. To them, your corpse is so very dear. With punctures, cuts, bruises, gashes deep and wide, most visible are your head, hands, feet, and side. These are all pierced, torn, drilled, and lanced. Your beaten flesh signals where whips have danced. In respectful sunset rush, you are folded therein. From this rest site, your story will begin. This cloth is thin, yet 14 feet long. Some will attest it right and others wrong. Doubtless it holds real features of a man, but its figure is not made by hand. Of all the image set in ordered place, nothing strikes my attention like that tranquil face. What is about it that rivets my eyes, that looking upon this countenance, my heart cries? And how is it that I can see his closed eyes open to look into me? One explanation alone for me can possibly suffice. I am beholding the entrance of divine paradise. April 1st, 1983, in the hospital again in Peru. Not knowing whether I was going to live. because I wasn't getting better. And then I was shipped up north, and the doctor that I had was the doctor who put Pope John Paul II back together again when he was shot in 1981. He was the only American doctor that was permitted. He was Dr. Kevin Cahill, Cardinal Cook's doctor, and the doctor for Marinol, since Marinol is associated with New York. They sent me to him. And it took him 6 months to kill all of the bacteria in my system and replace it with healthy amoebas, because my hepatitis was not A, nor B, and not even C. It was amoebic hepatitis, tropical. Very rare, naturally. You pick up the rare one, right? And so that experience of having that 6 months of going back every 2 weeks to the doctor, taking new pills, getting yogurt cultures put into me, and I eat yogurt every day since. That experience was a life changer for me. I didn't look at life the same way after 1983-84, because my recovery was actually too abrupt. I finally got out of bed. Remember, I went to bed February 4th. I got out of bed October 23rd. But I should have stayed a whole year in bed, because I went back to the mountains and my heart started acting up, which had not had problems before. And I had to be reassigned the next spring to Pennsylvania. And that opened up all kinds of things for me. And set loose finding people that I didn't know we had in our family, because during the time that I went back to Peru for 6 months, after I left my parents, my mother's only brother died, my father's 2 brothers died, my godmother died, and a cousin died. And my poor parents were just awash in grief, burying 5 people in 6 months. And so when I came back, I said, is this the only family we have? And that's when I discovered the Irish and the Germans. But would I have if I wasn't reassigned in Pennsylvania? Would I have if I hadn't gone through this? And what are we to look forward to at the end of this pandemic? From the experience that we have had in isolation during this whole year, in our second Lent of this, what are we to learn from this experience? How has our prayer been challenged and perhaps enriched? How has our listening improved, that we hear the Lord more than we have? And how have we indeed been able to reflect upon this, perhaps through journaling? At my noon talk, I asked, has anybody journaled here? And one lady raised her hand. So I asked her, what is it like for you? How long have you been doing it? She said, only this year. We have a little dialogue about that. Who journals here? 2, 3 of us, 4 of us? How long have you been journaling?
Since I'm about 21. Off and on.
Oh, a year or 2, huh?
Oh, thank you.
And what's the experience like for you?
Well, one thing I really love is going back and reading what I wrote when I was 21.
Are you surprised?
I was surprised at how mature I was, yeah.
Okay. And how you may have shifted also in your focus? What seemed important at 21? What is it like at 42 maybe, right? 42, whatever.
64, Saturday I was 64.
Congratulations. So has it been a good experience for you? Well, you've perdured, right? Have you steadily done it from 21?
No, off and on.
Okay. This was 60 years ago, but I really got serious in 1964. So it's been continuous since 1964. 99.9% of my days have been recorded. So it's been a good experience for me. Dave, how long have you been journaling?
About 25 years.
25 years. And why did it start? How?
I think it started when my son was born, that I wanted to have something to give him at some point. You know, a chronicle and things to remember that, you know, should I have, you know, not be around, you know, he'd have a record. And luckily I am around, and you know, the record's continued. And,
are they individual volumes?
no, it's all on computer. So
Okay.
it's one,
Yeah, you're a tech guy.
yeah,
Okay.
it's one enormous,
Do you have backup?
yes.
Okay. And the general experience, what would you say the general experience of journaling has been?
I'm surprised sometimes by how, if I look back, how things haven't changed. I'll look back and say, wow, I was doing that back then. It seems like I've only been doing it for 5 years or something like that, and I've been, doing it for 10 years or 15 years or, different things I'll write about. I'll say, wow, I didn't realize I was doing it that long.
In my experience, I've noticed how the focus has changed from being a teenager, what you seem to be interested in as a teenager, to what you're interested in by multiplying your age several times. And I notice now almost all of my journal entries begin with something about the prayer of the day, whether it's the Eucharist, liturgy, the hours, perhaps the theme of the homily, something like that, takes up about maybe a third of my entries. And then perhaps people have come for appointments, letters I've received, correspondence I've had, phone calls, or an event that has taken place. They're kind of all put together there. Father Chris, how long have you been keeping it from?
About 50 years. I started in 1969 when I joined the novitiate with the brothers of St. Charles Tuanga. And continued. I think when I became a professor, brother, I was so busy, I kind of like lost it. And then kind of picked it when I went to Germany for studies in 1982. And I think since then, I have different volumes.
So 40 years straight almost?
More or less.
And you began in 69?
Started in 1969.
Okay. And then was interrupted, but then...
Yeah, it would be there, I kind of like lost it and then picked it up again. When I went to Germany, I thought I'm coming to a new world here. I want to kind of like write all the events that's happening in my life.
Did you make any entries in German, or were they all in English?
Oh, well, some in German sometimes. They were very secretive. I didn't want anybody to know when I came back to Kenya. They were in German. Others were in English.
Well, for the four of us, then, it has been a generally good experience, right?
Yeah.
And it is reflective. And you are accountable to the Lord as well as yourself. That's why also, again, Dave has put together this 30-day walk with the Lord, and it does have a journalistic aspect to it, where you put down how you're responding to the scriptures, to the promptings of the Lord, and all of us can benefit from reflection. Maybe it comes out as a poem. Perhaps it comes out as a letter that you write to someone. I don't know if you ever saved copies of your own letters, but I know when we read some of the lives of the saints, we'd say, I'd love to know what St. Therese said to that guy, because this is what he said to her. Huh? We only get like one-way communication at times. We don't really know how that went on. But prayer is communication. Prayer is conversation with the Lord. The Lord has something to say to us in our daily events, in our interchanges with each other, in the Holy Scriptures, in the sacraments. And to be attentive to that is all beneficial for all of us. I had written 10 pages out, and I read it to Susan Monroe. She said, it's good, but you're going to lose them, because you're reading. And I always find reading a homily is deadly. So I would rather forget a few things that I wanted to say than lose eye contact with you. And I hope that what I've said is in accord with what Father Paul said about presence last week, and also leading to what Father Chris is going to say about confession next week. That all of these are meant to draw us closer to the Lord, because ultimately it's all about union with God, on earth as it is in heaven. And so I thank you for listening, and if you'd like a copy of this, I'll hand it out to you individually, as I did at the other thing. Any questions or responses or reactions? Thank you for coming out this evening.
Thank you, Father.
And if you'd like to pick up one, just come by and I'll give it to you. You may have gotten it out of the bulletin already. Okay, well, you can have another one. I have plenty of them. Right. different sizes because I cut them up that way.
Yes, before the store came in, Dave. I
Result?